I call the honourable member David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I just want to start by just asking ourselves how we ended at this very unhappy point, because all the way along the line we have the opportunity to actually get a much better bill than the one before us today. And I think back a few months ago when many of the National Party MPs and we were talking together about how we were able to put through a piece of legislation that would not only be better, that would provide an element of choice, but would also be able to endure the test of time, rather than completely erroneously, as Alan Peachy just said, something that's going to be overturned as soon as a Labor-led government comes in. And the interesting thing is that National Party MPs, and some of them are in the House today, were in agreement that this piece of legislation would not go through in its present form. They also told the NZUSA, the New Zealand University Students Association, that it would not go through in this sitting period, Mr Speaker, that would not go through, and instead we would have something different. And on top of that, we've had Michael Woodhouse in the House today, who's actually on YouTube saying exactly that. So to say that the National Party is not exactly committed to this piece of legislation, Mr Speaker, is a huge understatement. The real reason we are here today is politics. It's the politics of the ACT Party needing to be propped up by the National Party. That's why we're here. Heather Roy got rolled by Rodney Hyde. Rodney Hyde got rolled by Don Brash. Don Brash is probably rolling something as we speak. But the big thing is, Mr Speaker, that the point is, Mr Speaker, that the booby prize for all of this, was that Heather Roy took over the VSM bill. She took over the VSM bill, and the National Party had to get in behind ACT and pretend that they actually wanted to get this bill through, instead of what they really felt was that, in fact, they wanted a compromise along the lines of that we were producing and that we had actually put up. This piece of legislation, Mr Speaker, is completely unnecessary, and there's been a lot of talk about choice and the freedom of choice that we've heard from the previous two speakers. Let's look at the current legislation and its choice. Students currently have the opportunity, if they can muster 10% of the student population, to have a referendum on student associations. They have the choice to be able to do that. We're taking away that choice with this piece of legislation, Mr Speaker. We're removing that choice from those students. Now, that isn't about democracy. That's just about a piece of ideology that's being rammed through this Parliament, dressed up to look like a problem, and using this Parliament to put through legislation that denies students choice. That actually denies students choice, that takes away that choice. So don't come the we need freedom and we need choice thing with me, Mr Speaker. There is no party that's more committed to democracy and choice than the Labor Party, but we don't want to sit here, Mr Speaker, and be told that somehow that we are giving people choice as a result of this piece of odious legislation. The other thing that I want to raise, Mr Speaker, is the total mischaracterisation by the parties on the other side that somehow a student association is a union. It might be called a union. These are not employees. They're not workers. We have left compulsory worker unionism behind us. These are about students going along to an institution. They're not compelled to attend a tertiary institution. They are compelled to contribute to the relevant costs of that study. And these are these are relevant costs, Mr. Speaker. Health care, counselling, creche facilities, the type of things that we're looking at in terms of career advice, employment opportunities, sporting clubs, cultural activities. These are the parts of the university that are an essential element of our university system. These are the things that sustain students getting through their university career. They are essential parts of the university system, Mr. Speaker. And what's going to happen with this legislation? We know exactly what's going to happen. With the exception of Auckland University, which I would argue is an exceptional case because of its size, but we'll come to that in a minute, what's going to happen is that the fees going to student associations will dry up. They will dry up, as they have in just about every other place where this has been tried. And when they dry up, all of those services that I've just mentioned will also dry up and be put at risk as well. That's what will happen with this piece of legislation. And what will happen then? Well, no surprise, because they are essential to the university and student life. No surprise, the universities and polytechnics will pick up some of those services, and they'll charge the students for them. They'll charge the students more than the students are paying now to the Student Association for the same services that they were receiving before. And that's the nonsensical part of this legislation, Mr. Speaker. That is the absolutely nonsensical part, because the students will end up paying, but they won't have a say. They'll pay, but they won't get a say on how their services and what services exactly they'll be put up. That will be up to the university or the polytechnic. Those institutions, Mr. Speaker, those institutions will dictate what students will have, and the students, though they're paying for those services, won't get the say that they once previously enjoyed when they belonged to a student association. So, Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation fails on so many counts. It fails on so many counts. And then we have the extraordinary arrogance, Mr. Speaker, the extraordinary arrogance of the process. And I have to say, 4,500 submissions. 4,500 submissions came before the Select Committee. 2% were in opposition. We're in favour. We're in favour of this piece of legislation. 98% were in opposition. 98% opposed this piece of legislation, and they came from right around the country. They came from all of the student unions. Yes, I guess you could say that's true. But they also came from all of the polytechnics and universities, bar one. The institutions themselves don't want this. They don't want to take on having to provide all of these services for students. They don't want to do that. The arrogance of this is to ignore that evidence. The arrogance is to ignore those submissions. The arrogance is not to listen to good evidence, not to listen to the institutions, not to listen to the students themselves about what they want. Instead, we've got a dodgy, shonky deal that won't last, going through our parliament by a group of ACT MPs that won't even be here when this piece of legislation comes into being. Isn't that extraordinary? That you have over on the other side there National Party MPs that don't agree with this legislation. You have ACT MPs here that won't even be here when this legislation comes into being. And we are here in the second to last week of Parliament sitting in this session, Mr. Speaker, voting on an incredibly unpopular waste of time, which is the voluntary student membership, so that the party over there that those 5 members and sinking fast will not even be here to see the fruits of their labour. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Of all the people.
I call the